Today we're looking at Unit 6, Notes number 3, U.S. Reaction. So in the last set of notes, number 1 and number 2, we've been looking at how the war in Europe started. Now we're going to begin to look at the American reaction. What is America thinking while all of these events are happening? Why don't they get involved in the war right away? And what eventually leads them to get involved in the war? So Unit 6, Notes number 3, U.S. Reaction. So here's a map of Europe, August of 1939. So this is just before the war breaks out. So we know that the blue, these are the Axis powers, so it's Germany and Italy are together. And so it's right before they invade Poland. You see Great Britain and France, they're allies, so they're still independent. Then, just July of 1940, so a little long, just shy of a year, we see now the Axis powers have taken over the majority of mainland Europe. Great Britain remains kind of independent. The Axis powers are also moving into Norway and the Nordic region. So they're really starting to expand and grow their power. So FDR pledges neutrality. So while all this is happening, he is saying that the U.S. is going to be neutral. We're not going to pick sides. We're going to stay out of this European conflict. So within the U.S., you have people that are either isolationists or interventionists. So those who were isolationists were Americans who favored isolationism. They did not want to aid the Allies or send American boys to fight and die in a European conflict. They feel this does not involve us. We should not put our troops in harm's way. Americans who favored intervention wanted to send aid to the Allies and isolate the aggressor. So even those who wanted to intervene didn't feel that we needed to get involved in the war, but they felt that we should help Great Britain, help France, try to help them defeat Hitler. So in 1935, the Neutrality Acts were passed by Congress, and these are a series of acts. And so ultimately what Congress is trying to do is it's trying to create laws to say we don't want to be involved in this war, and so we're going to set limits in terms of what we can and can't do. So eager to aid the Allies, FDR had to appease the isolationists by signing the Neutrality Acts, and so these outlawed American arms sales and loans to nations at war. So we cannot sell them guns, ammunition, and we cannot lend them money. So it really is trying to keep us completely out of the conflict. And what you'll see during these notes is there'll be a progression where right now we're at a point where we aren't going to help, we're not sending any aid, and you'll see that as time goes on, little by little, our intervention increases. The Allies in trouble. So by June of 1940, British and French troops were being routed on the Western Front. So Germany, the Nazis, they're making incredible strides, they're making huge wins, and it's very difficult for countries to mount a defense against them. So the Nazis invade and they occupy France. The Nazis would occupy northern France, while the French would keep a Nazi-controlled puppet government in Vichy France. The Battle of Britain. Hitler plans to invade England, but first moves to gain air supremacy against the Royal Air Force. For 2 months and 24 hours a day, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, I think that's how you pronounce it, bombed English cities and war facilities. So it was a huge, huge airstrike. During this, the Battle of Britain, many of the citizens of like London and some of the major cities, they would spend the night in their subway tunnels or their underground to protect themselves from the bombing. So here is a map of France to kind of show you the German occupied zone in the north, and then the Vichy region to the south. So while it's considered the free zone, it has French officials that are overseeing it, but they're told what to do by German officials. So it really isn't a free zone. Here are some pictures of Germans taking over Paris. So you see they put up the Nazi flags. They would have troops walking down their streets. And also some pictures from the Battle of Britain. So this top one you have, I believe that's the Tower Bridge, and you also have St. Paul. So you just see this constant bombing, Lots of destruction. A lot of the major monuments in Britain may have been damaged, but not completely destroyed. So with England in trouble, America begins to send aid. So American intervention. FDR persuades Congress to amend or change the Neutrality Acts in order to aid Great Britain. So first you have cash and carry provisions. So in September of 1939, Congress allows the Allies to buy U.S. arms if they could pay in cash and ship them on their own ship. So we are now at the point where we will sell them guns, ammunition, whatever, but they have to pay us ahead of time, so we're not loaning it to them, we're not letting them use credit, and they have to come and pick it up. Then there was also bases for destroyers, promising all aid short of war to Great Britain. FDR makes a plan to give U.S. naval ships in return for British naval bases. At this time, we didn't need the naval bases, but we're trying to find ways to give naval ships to Great Britain. And so basically, they're running out of money. So we're trying to be creative, give them naval ships. In exchange, they're giving us naval bases in the Caribbean, which, again, we could use, but it's not something we need at the moment. So Germany and Italy respond by allying together with Japan. So they form the Axis powers. And so with this alignment, it's meant to threaten the U.S. with a two-front war. So if the U.S. does get involved, not only do we have to fight Germany and Italy in Europe, but we will also have to fight Japan in Asia. So it will split up American forces. And so it is a very strategic move by Hitler, because he does see the U.S. getting closer and closer to becoming involved in the war, and he does not want to have to fight the U.S. on his own in Europe. So he knows that if the U.S. splits, he would have a better chance. So here's the map of the Axis powers. So we see Nazis, Germany, and Italy. At this point, they've also started to invade northern Africa. And then we see Japan. Japan had previously began their aggression, trying to expand their territory into China, the Philippines, also French Indochina. So that's kind of where the Axis powers have control. So the Great Arsenal. After FDR wins re-election to his third term in 1940, he focuses on preparing for war. So military buildup. FDR convinces Congress to dramatically increase the defense budget to gear up for the war. He institutes the first peacetime draft. So even though we still haven't declared war, he does see that the U.S. will become involved. And he wants to make sure that we have soldiers that are trained. So I don't know if you remember when we talked about Germany and their violations of the Treaty of Versailles prior to starting the war, he began increasing the number of men he had in the military. So he had been training these soldiers since the mid-1930s, preparing for this. So the U.S. is now trying to play catch-up. So the Lend-Lease plan was made in March of 1941. With Great Britain out of cash, the Lend-Lease Act allowed allies to borrow arms and supplies from the U.S. So this whole idea of lend-lease, so when you lend something to someone, they're borrowing it. The intention is they're going to give it back. Even leasing, if you lease a car from a dealership, you're going to lease it for 3 years and then you give it back. So all of these items that Great Britain is getting from the Lend-Lease, you're talking about maybe tanks, jeeps, weapons, ammunition, and they're going to be used in war. So we're really not going to get anything back, but we're trying, again, being creative. How can we still help them even though they cannot pay us anymore? So we went from cash and carry, they have to pay us. We started trading, bases for destroyers. Now we're on to Lend-Lease. So June of 1941, Hitler violates his non-aggression pact with Stalin, and he invades the Soviet Union. So here are some political cartoons to kind of illustrate Lend-Lease, kind of what people thought of it. You know, here you have Uncle Sam. He's dumping a bunch of stuff. Shows he's two-thirds the way to England. Just the idea that we're just like giving him things like, here, take it. And then this shows where the Lend-Lease goods are going, primarily to Great Britain. We're also beginning to help out the Soviet Union, helping out Russia. So now that Hitler has gone back on his word, we'll see that the USSR, the Soviet Union, joins the Allied force. So the Atlantic Charter. FDR and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill secretly meet on a U.S. destroyer in August of 1941. So at this point, the U.S. still is not in the war. We haven't declared war on anybody. So eager to get FDR to declare war and send troops, Churchill had to settle for less. So Churchill wants the U.S. He wants to see the U.S. send troops. They want additional help, but FDR is not ready yet. So the U.S. and Great Britain declare aims and goals for the war. However, Roosevelt did promise Churchill he would try to provoke Hitler into an act of war. He felt that he could only declare war if a direct act was committed against the U.S. So Japan's attack plan. Japan targeted the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This is where battleship, aircraft carriers, and aircrafts were stationed. They see this as the main hub, which it is, of our entire Air Force, Navy in the West. Japanese Air Force practiced for months leading up to the attack. Their goal was to achieve a surprise attack that would cripple the U.S. fleet. The U.S. intercepted coded messages about the attack, so they knew an attack was coming. However, they did not know when the attack would happen or where it would happen. But the U.S. needed Japan to attack first in order for public support to be behind a declaration of war and to kind of get America riled up. So December 7th, 1941, around 8 a.m. on that Sunday, the attack began. So most of the soldiers were asleep in the submarines and the aircraft carriers, wherever it was that they were stationed. And so many of them died because their aircraft carrier, their submarine was sunk. They didn't get a chance to, make it out alive. So it was definitely a surprise attack. They did achieve that. Japanese torpedo planes and dive bombers targeted Battleship Row. Battleships were lined up perfectly, immobilized, so they were not expecting an attack. They were not prepared for this. Bombers attacked airfields. They destroyed air defense before it had a chance to mobilize. So once the attack began, soldiers did wake up, tried to mount a defense, but it was too little, too late. There were 2 waves of Zeros. Those are Japanese airplanes, nearly 400 in all, and the attack lasted for a little over 2 hours. So the aftermath. The U.S. defeat was complete. You had nearly 2,400 servicemen KIA killed in action. All battleships were out of action. They were either destroyed or damaged, and the Pacific Air Force was crippled. So the Japanese forces accomplished their mission. The aircraft carrier fleet, there was one aircraft carrier fleet that was out to sea. That one was spared. That would prove huge in the war. But this attack left Americans devastated, furious. They were ready to fight. This came as a huge shock. No one expected the U.S. to be directly attacked like this, and they didn't expect the attack to necessarily come from Japan. So America finally declares war on December 8th, 1941. Here's a picture of FDR addressing Congress, making a very famous declaration of war speech. So we are now officially in World War II. So it took the attack on Pearl Harbor to get FDR to finally declare war. So the notes are done. The next notes will talk about more about the U.S. preparations for war. Don't forget to continue to do your key terms.